When did someone who came in contact with the dead have to purify himself? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Numbers on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Numbers chapter 19. We're going to be reading from verses 11 to 16. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Numbers chapter 19, beginning of verse 11. He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then he shall be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not be clean. Whoever touches the body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall be unclean because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him. His uncleanness is still on him. This is the law when a man dies in a tent. All who come into the tent and all who are in the tent shall be unclean 7 days, and every open vessel which has no cover fastened on it is unclean. Whoever in the open field touches one who is slain by a sword, or who has died, or a bone of a man, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. In this chapter, we're dealing with what would happen when someone in Israel came in contact with a dead body. From our previous studies, we understood that coming in contact with the dead made one unclean, but the ritual for making oneself clean again had not been spelled out. It was extremely important that Israel have these instructions laid down, for remember, they were in the wilderness wandering for 40 years until the generation that rebelled had died. They were going to come in contact with many dead bodies, and so would need to avail themselves of this ritual often. Now you might wonder, why would coming in contact with the dead make one unclean under the law of Moses? Well, first of all, think. From a physical standpoint, once someone's body dies, their body begins to decay. Today, when we embalm bodies, we pump them full of chemicals that slow down the decaying process, but the body will eventually decay. At that time, they did not have these ways to embalm the body, but they did have some ways. When someone died, their body would quickly decay, though. Therefore, touching a dead body would make someone physically dirty. Now imagine going to try and worship God. Even if one had washed, you would still have come in contact with something that was decaying, and therefore you would expect under the law, where a premium was placed on physical cleanliness, that God would disapprove of such. But you also have to think about the spiritual. Even though dying is not sinful, death was one of the penalties of the sin of Adam that all men suffer. The tree of life was taken away from man in Genesis 3. Therefore, we all eventually die. So death itself is a reminder of sin. Do you really think that being associated with sin and then seeking to approach God would be approved of without purification? No. So in both the physical and spiritual sense, coming in contact with the dead made one unclean, and therefore one needed to make themselves clean in order to be able to worship God. But simply washing yourself in water would not do in this instance. You needed something more. In our last lesson, we had the sacrifice of the red heifer, which produced the ashes necessary to be used in this ritual. We'll deal with how the ashes were to be used, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. But for now, all we need to know is that they would be used. If anyone touches a dead body, he would be unclean for 7 days, an entire week. When would he need to purify himself? On the 3rd day and on the 7th day. I don't know why these specific days were chosen, but if you look at the numbers literally, the 3rd day was about halfway, so perhaps the first purification done on this day was to show that one was partway through his period of uncleanness, but not yet fully clean. Some may see these numbers symbolically and note that the number 3 usually represents God and 7 represents completeness, and therefore might think that this uncleanness was before God. Therefore God chose these days to show that he was the one who made man clean before him. The fact of the matter remains, though, we don't know why God chose these days, and in the end it does not matter. If one was to be clean under the law, he would simply follow the instructions. For if he didn't, he wouldn't be clean, and in fact would defile the tabernacle of the Lord and be cut off from Israel. But it wasn't simply if you touched a dead body that would make yourself unclean. If someone dies in a tent, anyone in the tent would be unclean and need to be purified. Any open vessel in the tent would be unclean and would need to be purified. Being among the dead was a serious thing, and therefore purification was important. If you were fighting in battle, being in the presence of the dead would not make you unclean, for the dead would necessarily be there. But if you touched the body of one killed in battle, or if you touched their bones or were in a grave, you would be unclean and need to be purified. What was involved in this process of purification? We'll find out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Numbers chapter 19, verses 17 to 22, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.